Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on carbon market. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Rob and Mr. Dan. Mr. Rob, what you want to share about carbon market? How does it work, or uh, what type of strategy emerging economy can develop for this carbon market?
Well, a carbon market is a market set around carbon credits, and a carbon credit represents about 1 ton of carbon dioxide. And what happens is a company that's generating carbon dioxide can buy a carbon credit from a company that is mitigating carbon dioxide, and that brings them into compliance. And it depends on what kind of a market you've got. You've got compliance and voluntary carbon markets. Compliance markets are based around regulation. Voluntary are based around sustainability goals, internal goals with regard to the companies. And so rather than mitigating your own carbon, you can buy a carbon credit instead. And in effect, you're funding another company's reduction in carbon. However, it does mean you're continuing to generate the pollution, and you're just being offset by another company that is not. Ever since we've started these carbon credit efforts, we haven't really made a major impact on the reduction of carbon dioxide. We continue to increase the production of carbon dioxide. So by and large, the carbon markets have not been as effective as I think people hoped in terms of reducing overall pollution. When we're talking about an emerging economy, clearly the side of it you'd want to be on is be producing the carbon credits by reducing carbon emissions, and then selling those carbon credits to more developed countries that are having trouble reducing their carbon emissions, and that would be an economic model. European Union has a fairly significant carbon market that you could work through, and I believe the carbon credits can be traded through that market as well as others. But that's kind of the net of what a carbon market is. It's surrounding this idea of offsetting carbon emissions by purchasing the carbon reductions that other companies, other entities have been successful at doing. And I'll pass it over to Dan.
Thanks, Rob. As usual, a great summation of the topic. Yeah, I think the offset is the kind of the lowest level of taking responsibility for the biosphere. Ideally, people would do point source control. That is, not generate the problem that interferes with life processes. And carbon is the big, public enemy number one, apparently, on the biosphere life process disruption. But it's really not the only one. I mean, I think it's fair to just use the carbon pollution idea as a test case for various other kinds of disruptions that we're doing to the planet's living systems. That's been estimated we're overshooting our planet's sustainability by about 4.5 planets if our current lifestyle is not changed. So that's going to take more than just paying someone to neutralize the amount of carbon damage that you're doing. We've known for a long time that carbon was a problem. It's an insulating gas. I think there was a scientist back in the 1800s that showed how it traps heat, and even there were articles in the early part of the 20th century saying, hey, it could be a problem burning all this this carbon producing gas stuff. But that doesn't stop the people that make a living off high carbon emission practices from creating FUD, which is an acronym which means fear, uncertainty, doubt, and in fact that doubt can take the form of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, which is three interesting categories of how to confuse the truth or the scientific evidence-based consensus on an issue. So carbon markets and carbon offsets, I think, like I said, they're a good starting point. We should not just be doing markets for carbon, but we should actually be doing markets for all of the human rights sustainability goals. And I think you can break those down into sub goals that can be pursued as actual household to household kind of community science projects. One of my favorite ways to not just reduce the carbon problem, but actually to increase the productivity of the biosphere, is to start with the soil. We know that the soil has an immense potential to sequester atmospheric carbon. And one of the ways that you can do this is changing your soil from a dead condition to a living condition. Now, the typical healthy living soil is full of microbes. In fact, a teaspoon of healthy soil has more living organisms than all the species on Earth. I think just literally trillions and trillions of soil microbes, and this is an ecosystem in the soil. It's very interesting. It's evolved over literally billions of years. The whole process of life has been a 4 billion year or so process, and a lot of that life was and is microbial life. If you think of yourself as, oh, I'm a human, I'm a single human organism, no, only about 1/10 of your 100 trillion cells are human DNA. The rest of those are other kinds of cells, microbes, etc. So the soil is kind of the same way. We are kind of, our health is tied to the health of the soil and the health of the greater biosphere. So how can we encourage people to steward the health of the soil, which can store carbon? Well, there's an interesting experiment that started with the Soil Conservation of Canada, I believe. And it's got the somewhat humorous name of Soil Your Undies, because you can test your soil by burying some cotton undershorts in the ground for about 60 days. And if you dig them up and your soil has strong microbial health, nothing will be left except the elastic strap at the top. All the cotton will literally be consumed by the microbes. And that's a pretty good scientific community science kind of experiment. I think there's thousands of people have done this, and it's a good evidence-based baseline, because you can literally see how degraded, the percent degradation that the microbes have done to the underwear after 60 days. So that's something that I think people should be participating in. I think we can solve a lot of the biosphere problems with community science. Now, the other thing about markets is incentivizing people to do good biosphere science is an interesting proposition, because of course carbon offsets and carbon markets, that's a strictly monetary incentive. Although we know that people will often do things for non-monetary reasons. They will do things to win trophies or to win recognition in a community. There's various kinds of awards and souvenirs. So what I'd like to start doing is test how much incentivization occurs from monetary and non-monetary means, and kind of make a social science experiment of that. But those are just some opening thoughts on the topic. I could probably go on for a while, but I don't want to go on too long, so let me stop there. Thanks.
Mr. Rob, yeah.
Well, with regard to carbon markets, there are a number of problems with carbon markets. One of them is the carbon credits themselves may not be well established. There is a real concern that folks are double counting the credits, which means that the amount of reduction is not offsetting the amount of generation. A lot of human rights abuses surrounding the underlying effort, which is kind of unfortunate. And as we were talking about sequestering and greenwashing. Greenwashing is again problematic. It really looks like a lot of folks are kind of gaming the system. And this is where companies falsely market their green credentials or misrepresent their climate neutral products or services. So a lot of questionable behavior going on in the space, and you really you don't do a lot of good. One, the entire mechanism for carbon markets is problematic, but if you've got entities that are actively fraudulently creating the record and trading false carbon credits, then you're not doing anything other than enriching the people that are doing it, and you're not cutting the emissions at all. I'm not a big believer in carbon markets, as you can probably tell. But it was created. The carbon markets were created because it was estimated that, particularly for emerging economies, the cost of bringing them into compliance with the Paris Accords is going to be around $6 trillion. And the current money available for that is a small fraction of the money that's needed to make that happen. And so it was thought that using carbon credits would provide the funding necessary to make meaningful change. But companies or entities that cheat don't typically make meaningful change. They're not doing anything. They're just falsifying the records, and so that makes it problematic. So for these markets to work, there needs to be a higher level of audit, higher level of validation that's currently occurring, and the markets have to be generating money at about 6 times where they currently are generating, to cover the costs of reducing the carbon emissions as was expected. I think my big concern with the Paris Accords and other government efforts is they're often about visibility, making it look like companies and governments are doing something, and less about actually doing something, which can be problematic. So in the end, the carbon markets, if they were done properly, and if there was auditing and validation of the carbon credits, would have at least the positive of generating the money necessary to make the meaningful change to reduce carbon emissions. Currently, it doesn't appear that that's the case, and so we've got a wounded system that needs better oversight and better controls in place to ensure that it's being used properly. And then I'll pass back to Dan.
Boy, that is the issue in the room that no one's talking about, is how are we doing accountability on these people? I mean, there are things like the Better Business Bureau that lets people rate bad experiences with businesses, and there's things like Charity Watch that monitors for charities that are actually using much of the money to, for overhead or for self-enrichment. I think to be a valid charity, you have to be under like the 10% administrative ceiling. But yeah, I'm going to have to check into who is policing the carbon markets. You don't happen to know if there's any accountability agencies set up for that? Like you said, you're kind of skeptical. Yeah, you're shaking your head no on that, but feel free to jump in. So yeah, maybe that's, I love, one of my favorite authors is David Brin. He's a science fiction author and an astrophysicist, and he talks about reciprocal accountability as being the mechanism by which we prevent harms in society. He was mostly talking about this in reference to artificial intelligence and the negative prospects that could have on humanity. But really, the idea of transparency and reciprocal accountability are applicable to all forms of human organization. I like the academic world. I think for the most part, people doing science are honest, and they tend to be open to peer review. Science is based on good controls, good data, being able to replicate someone's experiment somewhere else. So science is kind of inherently a reciprocal accountability exercise. But we really need to see more of that in the world of planetary maintenance and keeping ourselves from not going extinct, because it is a question of mass extinction. We are in a phase of history where we humans are demonstrably causing the mass extinction of non-human species. So it's nothing to be complacent about. I don't know, maybe we should be spending more time on what motivates people to get engaged on things that are going to save their lives, because we don't seem to have that proper level of engagement or motivation currently. I've got some ideas on that regarding Dunbar tribes. The Dunbar's number is the tribe of people you can realistically get closely bonded to in a lifetime. It's somewhere about 150 to 350 people. We're not really studying social science problems from that context. We're not using geolocation sufficiently. we've got all these great tools for geospatial and location intelligence. We've only really begun to crack that information revolution open. We're not using gamification. It's been noted that when you make a prize, you put up a prize bounty on solving a problem, you get about 10 times the amount of activity towards solving that problem that you would have got if you just spent the money in the marketplace. So that's an interesting example. I think, for example, I am on a team that's attempting to solve the carbon problem. There's a Gigacarbon X Prize, and they've divided into ocean, air, and land categories. Our team is done some calculations on what it would take to make a seastead that would be capable of solving the atmospheric carbon problem. And it's again, it's not just a problem in the atmosphere, because the oceans uptake this carbon and they change it into carbonic acid. The higher acid level in the oceans dissolves away sea creatures that build their shells from calcites and minerals. So, and that's actually where a lot of the heat is acting. The oceans act as a heat sink so all this carbon and heat in the atmosphere is doing triple duty damage in the oceans right now. So really that needs to be the focus, I think, of these mitigation and remediation efforts. So yeah, I think that the carbon market problem is it's obviously branches out into other problems, and I think the problem of getting people to solve problems collectively is a big one. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Rob, about getting humans to solve problems in different ways? That's kind of a broad topic, but I think it's relevant to this question.
Yeah, it is. Being creative and innovative about solving individual problems is always important, and it certainly is going to require a certain amount of innovation, because the economic cost of sequestering carbon or reducing carbon emissions is significant, and at least right now, you're not really able to pass that cost on to the customers in the competitive market unless your competitors are also doing the same thing, and so your costs are in line with theirs, and then you can raise prices to cover. And that becomes the underlying problem is how do you do what's right without taking a financial hit? And of course, if you take a financial hit, there's a chance you're going to lose your job because of the hit. So you're at cross purposes. You want to do what's right, but your financial incentives are focused on you doing what's wrong, because that's where the greatest economic benefit is. And so we go back to where I still think the effort should be, and that's assigning the cost of climate damage to the companies that are creating it. So if you do climate damage, you have to pay to correct the climate damage you do. Much like if you're in a car accident and it's your fault, you pay for the other guy's damage. But we don't do that with regard to carbon emissions yet. Though we do not charge companies for the emissions they have. In fact, here in the United States, in the petrochemical industry, we actually provide the petrochemical industry with financial incentives to produce more oil, not financial incentives to produce more oil cleaner. We do require them to do things, but we cover them on the cost side. So it's made it very difficult to move off petrochemicals, because we're incenting that industry to continue to operate, and that creates a fairly significant problem. And the same thing with cattle. Again, incentives focused on the wrong thing. We should be providing incentives for using the proper feed, so you don't produce the intestinal gases at high volumes. But we don't. Yeah. But we don't do it. So in the end, our financial methodologies are not in line with our environmental desires, and as a result of that being decoupled, we're not as effective as we otherwise would be.
I think one of the economic names for this is true cost accounting, or full life cycle, cradle to cradle. They talk about. I know when, for instance, when you buy a TV set in the European Union, you pay in advance on the decommissioning fee to dispose of that television. So that's an example of people not making this what's called an externality in economics. It's when you kind of shuffle the cost off outside of your economic calculation, which we've really been doing far too much of for far too long, and that's why we're running into to problems like we are with things like excess carbon in the atmosphere and the oceans. So, is it going to come down to people being forced to change if they can't do it voluntarily? I hope not. I hope we can explore the non-coercive ways. I hope we can make the voluntary ways attractive enough for people to change their habits and lifestyles.
Well, eventually the climate's going to change to a degree that we'll have to. I mean, if we wanted to continue to breathe, the question is once we get to that point, will we be in a spiral, and will anything we do have any impact on what's going to come? I mean, the idea of living in, abandoned mine shafts or something in the future is not something that I find particularly appealing. But if we don't do something reasonably soon, the climate change is going to become so dire that we're going to have to change, where we live, and perhaps the surface of the planet will no longer be a viable place for us to exist, which would be problematic. Because we go subterranean, we can't possibly support the amount of population that we currently have. So it would result in a fairly large scale kill off of our population, which, if you're the part of the population that's being killed off, it's not going to be pleasant. But it's also the argument that says that maybe they'd be the lucky ones because everybody else would be in a pretty much a world of hurt, except for the very wealthy, and even they would be at risk of fairly significant reprisals, because when you have a large disparity and people are hurting, it's not unusual to have something like the French Revolution, where suddenly you're hauling out the people that have and killing them en masse to take what they've got, which wouldn't be enough to feed or support whoever's left. So it'd be one of those environmental spirals that would have huge human toll, both on those that are of low socioeconomic levels, and eventually those at high levels as well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you talk about mine shafts, because we know that microbial life goes down miles and miles beneath the Earth's surface, and some people are kind of sanguine or philosophical. Evolution will just try again. Humans were a failure, but actually, it's been pointed out that the amount of time it takes to evolve a new successful life form is not compatible with the age of the solar system right now. We've used all the easily available energy and materials and minerals. So if humans don't get life sustaining right, it's probably not going to get another shot, at least in this solar system.
Well, evolution's too slow. We're changing the climate too fast for evolution to keep up. And now we can do bioengineering, which we're talking about for space exploration, for exploring other planets, to re-engineer ourselves to handle the new environment. But what do you do for high winds? I mean, for really high winds and for catastrophic weather events. Hard to bioengineer that. If you got a hurricane coming through and it's ripping houses out of the ground, how do you bioengineer somebody to survive that? It becomes difficult. So then you talk about extraterrestrial or subterrestrial living and bioengineering for that. We could do that. I mean, live as moles for the rest of our lives. But again, I don't think I think we could argue that we would no longer be human, and probably far closer to that time machine future that Rod Taylor showcased for us years ago. What were they called? The Morlocks?
The Morlocks, yeah.
Eloi. Yeah. The Morlocks and Eloys. And so, but mostly with just Morlocks, no Eloys. So that just doesn't seem to be a pleasant future. But we do as a race have a significant problem thinking strategically. And we can mobilize on something, for instance, the recent attacks in Israel. Massive instant mobilization to respond to the attack. Tactically, we are good at moving stuff. Strategically, I mean, we put the same kind of effort into fighting climate change that Israel is using to fight Hamas. We could solve the problem, or that Ukraine and Russia are putting in to fight each other. If we focus that same kind of effort on went to war with climate change, we could make some real progress. But because the impact of climate change is 10, 20, 30 years off into the future, it just doesn't have the priority that something that's in your face does. And the end result is we just don't put the effort in to making the change, even though the outcome in terms of climate change, we know is dire. I mean, if we don't do something, we know the race won't survive, and that means pretty much everybody dies. Which doesn't necessarily happen in a war. A lot of people die, but we don't reach a point where you have well, sometimes, but rarely reach a point where you wipe out an entire population. Although with nuclear weapons, that I wouldn't take that bet at the moment. But in the end, finding a way for us, and maybe this is the way AI plays for us, the way AI in the metaverse is with those concepts, we can create simulations of what the world's going to look like, and then thrust people's faces in what that world is going to be, and make it feel like it's real time. And it's not like we don't know how to do this. Insurance sales does the same thing. Insurance sales to work has to convince you to think strategically about an event that has not occurred yet, may never occur. In fact, you hope it won't occur. Insurance is one of those weird things where you bet that there's going to be a disaster. The insurance company bets there won't be, and you hope the person you're betting against is right. And that doesn't really occur in any other mechanism. But it's very much an insurance sale for climate change. You've got to convince people to make the investment to overcome a future problem. And I think for a lot of us boomers, we were thinking, hey, well, climate change is going to be something that the following generations are going to have to worry about. Well, I hate to say this, but we're being impacted right now by climate change events, and it may very well be that we're going to have to deal with them as well as the future generations. So it is incredibly important we get our act together. 3 countries that are apparently doing this, or at least are highlighted at doing the carbon markets, are Costa Rica, Cambodia, and Ghana. Costa Rica and Cambodia, because they have extensive forests that can be used for carbon capture, and Ghana for developing instrumentation and technology to be used to monitor and hopefully drive effective climate change technologies in the positive direction. So those are all, and those, you can argue all 3 countries are merging, and all 3 have found a way to benefit and financially profit from what appears to be realistic efforts to reduce climate change, and sell carbon credits or sell technology that can be used to measure and create carbon credits and make money that way. So those countries stand out, at least right now, as being kind of test cases or examples of how you might be able to use these carbon markets profitably and do good.
So let's encourage that by doing our tourism in those countries. What were they again? Cambodia,
Costa Rica, Cambodia, Ghana. Yeah, we actually thought about moving to Costa Rica at one point. I don't care for the economic diversity, though. There's too big a gap between those that are wealthy and those that are poor. And then I found out, of course, Costa Rica is a place where there is quite a bit of drug traffic coming across the country, and you don't want to get involved or anywhere near that. But beside that, those 3 countries are doing good work. And by the way, Costa Rica is beautiful if you ever want to visit. I've never been to Cambodia or Ghana though.
They used to call Costa Rica, I think, the Switzerland of the Caribbean, or the Caribbean. Yeah, had to think for a second. Mediterranean, Caribbean. Yeah, get those 2 confused. But why do you think humans are so catastrophe action motivated, and they're not long-term thinking? I mean, is this an evolutionary, feature, a bug? I mean, it was safe to do what the herd was doing and not try to use that forebrain for your foresight powers.
Well, probably a holdover from our creation. I mean, carried forward. It's. I mean, if we go way back into the time of the cavemen, they just had to deal with whatever was in their face. It's not like they had a lot of data about a meteor is going to hit or flood or whatever. They just dealt with things the way they were. There was no ability to do simulation. There was no ability to look out ahead. No written history to study or learn from. And as a result, they became very good. And to survive, they became very good at being very, very tactical, being able to respond to a threat as they saw it and respond appropriately, which I think carried forward the race. Then we developed history. We developed the ability to think about the future, and think through things. But we're not wired that way. Our hormones are the way our body responds to a threat. Is very tactical in nature, and often destructive. If you think about when we just start pumping hormones into our body when we get excited or get threatened, some of us can freeze up. It can damage even our tactical response if we don't do it properly. But for a short period of time, we are capable of doing things that we are not when we do it right. We're capable of doing things that we're not always able to do. But it's a very short-lived thing. You can't stay wired up and functioning at that level for an extended period of time. And so we just don't seem to be able to, change the tactical nature of our biology to really prioritize long-term strategic efforts and moves. Don't get me wrong. It's not to say that we don't do some long-term things. We built infrastructure. We do recognize that it's important to build dikes and dams and do things like that to provide for our needs going forward. But we've been less able to do things like respond effectively to earthquakes. I mean, to give you another example, the biggest earthquake in the United States is supposed to occur off the Cascadia Fault, which is off my coast here in Oregon. And to date, I think Portland and Washington, the two cities most likely to be badly hit, are only about 15 to 20% prepared for an earthquake, even of a lesser magnitude. That's estimated to be a magnitude 9 when it hits. The largest I'm aware of, I think the big one in California was 7.2 back in 1992. I think it was 1992. That hit there, and that did a lot of damage. Dropped, and California was structured to handle Category 7 earthquakes after the San Francisco earthquake in the early 1900s, and even so, it didn't do that great. I mean, a lot of freeway bridges collapsed during that earthquake. Significant infrastructure.
That was the 94 Northridge one, I think.
94. Actually, you're right. It was 94. Yeah. Northridge one, and that was a 7.2, and Cascadia is going to be 9. And building for a Category 9 earthquake does require a substantial amount of structural change, and certainly you don't want to use cement, you don't want to use brick, the stuff that's behind your head, nothing that's rigid, because that stuff's all going to break. And even wood doesn't hold up well on the night. I was looking at earthquake simulations 2 days ago, and even wood will fail on a Category 9 earthquake. You need steel. Steel will hold in the Category 9. Now the people may go, in the simulation I saw, the people went flying out of the windows, but the structure stood. So it does kind of suggest that perhaps as you build for Category 9, you might want to bolt the furniture down and have things for people to hold on to, so don't go flying out of windows. But with regard to earthquakes, each category is a magnitude 10 times the prior category. It's a logarithmic scale, and we can visibly see what happens. I mean, certainly we've seen earthquakes of lower categories happening all over the world with massive devastation, particularly with regard to cement or rigid structure buildings that just fall apart and collapse, killing or trapping the people that are in them. And so we've seen it, and you would think that would motivate folks to build differently, but it doesn't. And same thing here. We had massive fires. I toured one of the older fire areas a couple months back. People have rebuilt with wood houses. Makes no sense to me. The wood houses do not hold up well in fires. In fact, wood houses with wood siding. I'm in the process. You're pounding in the background. I'm in the process of replacing all my siding with Class A fire-resistant siding, just for that very reason. But I'm the exception, not the rule. And so getting people to even when they've been confronted with fires, and we've had huge fires every summer for the last 3 years. Here, so it's in our face on a regular basis. You look at most of the construction that's going up. Even metal roofs are rare, and they're still putting up not so much shake anymore, but there's still composite roofs which are not as resistant to fire as tile or metal. And so and just to save some money, and the end result is okay. And that people have bug out trailers and they're ready to evacuate. But if they just hardened their house, you could shelter in place. You wouldn't have to evacuate. You could stay in your house, and your house would withstand it. Plus, you get to keep all your belongings, which can be kind of problematic. So we just don't do it the way we should.
Yeah, speaking of fire, I know that there's firefighting systems called high fog, where you basically take the water and you atomize it into a fog, and that's basically you get 1,000 times the firefighting effectiveness when you fight fire with a fog cloud instead of with droplets or with streams of water. So really, every pool should have a high fog generator. Just if there's a firestorm, boom, every pool becomes a cloud bank that can be pumped into the air for 10 minutes. That would stop a lot of firestorm events like we saw in Maui and other places. But
Dan, I've got to run. That was a call reminding me. I actually have a 9:30 meeting I'm supposed to be on, so I'm going to abandon you here and let you watch.
Oh, okay. Well, I would love getting to interview you. I could go on. You're so great to talk to. All right, see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Good luck. Yeah, I'll just continue with some of the trains of thought we've been talking about there. I think the carbon problem, the carbon market, the carbon offset problem, it's a symptom of short-term thinking. As Rod was pointing out, we are thinking tactically when we should be thinking strategically as well. So maybe what we really need is a market for strategic thinking, a strategic thinking market, because we don't do enough long-term thinking. There's a foundation I like called the Long Now Foundation. And one of the things they do is put an extra 0 in front of the year. So our year, instead of writing it 2023, it would write 02023. So that will solve the Y10K problem. When we hit the year 9,999, we won't be worried about, oh no, we only have 4 digits for the year. We'll have that 5th digit ready to go. So start putting a 0 in front of your years. Start thinking long term. Start thinking strategically. Don't be so catastrophe focused. Maybe part of that having to think that way is because we were living hand to mouth through much of evolution. We had to gather whatever resources we could find for the next 10 minutes or the next hour or the next day. So when you're in a resource scarce living situation, you do tend to abandon long-term thinking, and you do have to think 99% tactically. But we are at a point where we can't afford to continue with that style of emphasis of tactical over strategic. Now, one ray of sunshine I do see is machine learning is on an exponential trend. So maybe machine learning will come to our partnership, and that resource can do the strategic long-term thinking that we're not that good at in groups. But if it follows Moore's law with the microchip, look at the microchip, which has got 1 million times more powerful in 5 decades. Well, this could happen with ML or AI, as some people call it. I think it's still in the machine learning category myself. But is AI going to become 1 million times more powerful in a matter of decades or even years? This is a distinct possibility that we need to think in an anticipatory design science kind of way, like Buckminster Fuller described himself as an anticipatory thinker and a design scientist. Well, I guess we're going to end the show a little bit early today, unless someone else joins. So I hope to get to chat with you all next time. And meanwhile, think long term and live long and prosper. Bye.